Hello and good morning. And now, as you may have guessed it from the title of today's video, we will be talking about attachment styles. You might be wondering, why are we talking about this? The reason being is that attachment is super important to understand because it really helps to understand the root behavior of a lot of different things. And also, I think it's important to talk about attachment in relation to BPD. But before we can do that, I will be doing that in a separate video in the future. It's important to first have a really good foundation of understanding of what the attachment styles are, where they come from, and how they differ from one another. So you might be wondering, what the hell is an attachment style? Great question. Attachment style is really this pattern of behavior that we see in and around relationships. And attachment styles are thought to mirror this relationship that we had with our primary caregivers when we were little. What does that mean? Practically speaking, is that when we are children, we have our parents or grandparents, teachers, family friends, whoever is the primary people taking care of us, interact with us in a certain way. Based on these interactions, we then learn to develop an attachment. So feeling safe and secure with them, feeling anxious, feeling insecure because everything is super unpredictable. And given our own individual circumstances, we will then develop attachment to those people, and this will translate later in our attachment styles that we see as adults. All right, so as some of you may already know, there are 4 primary attachment styles, but specifically there are 2 large categories. So we have secure and insecure, and then within the umbrella of insecure attachments, we have anxious, avoidant, and disorganized. But let's start with the first one, which is the secure attachment style, which is believed to be about 62% of the population of us who would be securely attached. These are people that can accept love and give love, that can be trusted and trust others. So they're very open when it comes to relationships. They feel very secure in them. There's not this constant rumination about, are they going to leave me? Do they love me? Do they care about me? Can I trust them? These are the people that typically grew up in an environment with primary caregivers that were open and receptive to their love, that gave them enough independence, so without suffocating them, because sometimes we see these really helicopter parents that almost teach the kids that they can't rely on their own instincts. So people who grew up in those households where there's a great balance in between, the children can feel like they can go to their primary caregivers when they're feeling hurt or that they need love, but also that they're not suffocated by those people, so that there's a good balance between independence and dependence. All right, so now that we have an understanding of this first category, the secure attachment, once again, about 62% of the population, we can now move to the insecure umbrella. Specifically, the first one being the anxious attachment, which is about 15% of the population. Now, when we think of these people, these are the people that have a deep fear of being abandoned. They are the individuals who feel very insecure and uneasy in relationships, very clingy, needy, needs a lot of validation, a lot of reassurance. These are the people that if you don't text them back immediately, or you're going away on a weekend and you'll be away from them, they might feel this trigger of, are they going to leave me? Will they still love me when they come back? So we see this as a pattern of being highly insecure about themselves in the relationship, needing a lot of validation and reassurance, and really marked by this fear of abandonment, okay? You might be wondering, what causes this attachment style? When we look at children who grow up in households with parents who are also anxiously attached, again, thinking about these parents that are very anxious, almost helicopter-y to a point where they don't let the kids do anything by themselves, and the kids learn to essentially not trust their own instincts, not trust that they can trust others, essentially. And also sometimes we see these caregivers as being unpredictable. So we don't really know, are they going to come back? And so when they are around, there's a tendency to need to cling to them, to be needy, to ask for love and reassurance, which obviously makes sense then that if you grew up in that kind of environment, that later on as an adult, you would feel the same sense of urgency when it comes to your romantic partners about them not leaving you. All right, so the second subtype within the insecure category would be the avoidant attachment style, which is about 23% of the population. Now, the avoidant attachment is kind of the opposite of the anxious attachment style in the way that they interact or feel in relationships. So contrary to the anxious style, which they feel very insecure and clingy and needy, we have the avoidant, which they have an extremely hard time being vulnerable, opening up. Those are the people that would have commitment issues, that are very guarded, that as soon as they start to feel loved or attention, they kind of freak out and leave and move on to the next thing. These are the people that have one foot out of the door when they're in a relationship, almost finding flaws with everyone to justify why they can't commit to anyone. This person is never the perfect person, and there's always someone who's going to be better. So it's always just moving on to the next thing. It's a really deep fear of intimacy that blocks them to connect with others, okay? So again, what would cause a more avoidant style of attachment? When looking at home environments growing up or interactions with primary caregivers, we see primary caregivers who typically will neglect them, okay? So not meeting their needs, whether physical needs for touch, needs such as hunger, okay, or play or love and those kinds of things. So neglecting them, withdrawing love, telling them that their emotions are not important, that they're not valid. And so those children in those homes or environment learn to internalize this belief that being close to others is dangerous, and opening up and being vulnerable only leads to me being rejected and neglected. And so why would I do this? So it's a defense mechanism that gets built over time, and it makes sense given that environment. And so again, when we look at these people as adults, they have a really hard time letting their guard down, because time and time again, when they were little, they were constantly hurt. And so now it's really hard for them to connect, to be vulnerable, to commit, to open up, to feel like they can stay in a committed relationship with someone without needing to opt out before it gets too real and raw. Finally, the last category of the insecure attachment styles would be this disorganized attachment style, which is about 1 to 5% of the population. This is also known as the fearful avoidant, and really this would be the one that we would link to BPD. Again, though, I will make a separate video on that later to really go into detail about how attachment has an impact on the development of BPD. But for the time being, for this specific video, let's just talk about what disorganized attachment style is. As I said, it's really the perfect combination of both anxious and avoidant. And so these are people who have a really deep craving for affection, but at the same time, a really big fear for connection. And so there's a desperate need to be loved, and also a deep fear of intimacy. And what we see is this push and pull in relationships. And so when they are with someone, if the person is being overly open and warm and trusting, this almost triggers this avoidant piece of it where they start to pull away and think, oh, this is getting too scary. There's too much intimacy. It's too close. And what this happens, this other person then starts to pull away, and then this triggers the anxiety piece of it. Oh, don't leave me. I love you. I can't live without you. So it's this back and forth in between these two characteristics that define both anxious and avoidant, okay? So again, these are the people, really hard time with intimacy, but at the same time, there's a deep desire for it. And when we look at the causes, once again, we would look at primary caretakers who maybe themselves have this disorganized attachment style, or who neglect them and abuse them physically, emotionally, sexually, that they pull and withdraw love constantly. So I'll only love you when you're doing this specific thing, and now you're the worst, and you're a terrible child when you're doing these other things. And so it's very unpredictable, very chaotic. There's abuse usually that goes into these kinds of home environments growing up for the children who become disorganized later in life. But honestly speaking, there's not that much research that has been conducted on it, given that it's only 1 to 5% of the population. That's very small. The interesting piece, though, that I can point out is that when we look at the percentages of that, it's very close to also the percentage of people that we see with BPD. So there's no mistake that there's a clear link in between those two. And when looking at BPD from an attachment lens alone, everything really makes sense when we start to really dive deep into the disorganized attachment style. All right, so that's it for today's video. I hope that you learned a thing or two about attachment styles. As I had mentioned, I will be making another video in the future about the disorganized attachment style in relation to BPD. But for the time being, you know the drill. If you have any questions, leave a comment down below so that I can use that to create more videos in the future. On that note, it was nice to see you all. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time for another episode of On the Line.